Hello, everyone. So there we go. We're getting to Nietzsche, which means that there is an after and there's a before, and everything after will be influenced somehow by Nietzsche's idea. So I would like you to think about Nietzsche as a point of convergence of a lot of previous philosophical thought that actually comes together toward the end of the 19th century after the experience of the revolutions that we already discussed and the Industrial Revolution and the progress. So Nietzsche, as you could tell from reading The Antichrist, my copy is actually in Spanish. I got that when I was a graduate student. Not because it was assigned, just because, it was on sale or something. And I took it on a road trip to the Grand Canyon, and that's where I read it, in the middle of nowhere. And it kind of changed my life. I was interesting by the tone, right? A very angry tone. You could tell that, in previous work by Nietzsche, this isn't, much of a later work toward the end of his life. But in previous work of Nietzsche, whether you have a little bit of a mystical tone or you might even have, a very jargony, philosophical tone, but this is really, the older man that is coming to a point of saturation, right? I mean, stuff like, I am tired of man, is criticism of Christianity, obviously, is very linked to Judaism and comparison with Buddhism, and Islam is also there. I want to start with bringing up some very important French terms, right? Nietzsche is very passionate about French literature, French philosophy, the French Revolution. That's why if you would read Nietzsche in German, you would find all those French words in there. And two of them are very important for today's discussion. One of them is décadence, right? And I'd like you to think about and pick up the places where he actually defines décadence. And the other one is ressentiment, right? Which in Spanish is resentimiento. That's why they don't keep the French word if you read it in Spanish. So, first, I'd like to bring up, we'll talk more in details about several different passages, but I'd like to bring up his comparison with Buddhism, right? The fact that he says that Buddhism does not promise anything, but delivers, whereas Christianity promises to deliver but doesn't, right? So that's something more of a comparative religious approach in order to analyze Christianity. He constantly has to compare it with whether Buddhism and with the religion of origin of Christianity, which is Judaism, sorry. But for him, the base problem of Christianity, and I'm sorry, I didn't plan on having this reading assigned to you guys over Easter weekend. It just happened to be, and plus on top of everything with the circumstances. So I hope everybody took it with critical distance. Um, but basically, it's claimed that Christianity is at war with the senses, right? Is at war with sensual pleasure, and by and large, is at war with joy, right? Which is a pretty radical claim coming from somebody at the end of the 19th century, turn of the 20th century, in a Germany that he also blames on a lot of different levels. And as you could tell, also toward the end of the essay, he also blames it for um, the Protestant Reformation. Right, Germany is responsible for that. Martin Luther, is not somebody that Nietzsche particularly admires, right? Um, because he claims that by wanting to destroy the church, he actually save it, right, by attacking it, and that's something that Foucault will keep on working later on, right? Foucault is obviously deeply influenced by Nietzsche, right? Also, another point that is pretty interesting that I'd like to discuss because it's very connected with the literature that you guys are studying, right? Whether it is in the French tradition or in the Spanish tradition, right? The idea that Christianity is offered two figures for that compensation, right? So, on the one way, it deprives people of sexual pleasure, sensual pleasure, joy, the senses, but it compensate with the figures of Jesus and Mary. So Jesus would be the figure that is designed for a female audience, religious audience, and Mary for a male religious audience, right? The condemnation of Judaism is, of course, very polemical because, as you might know, Nietzsche has been assimilated for decades, all the way till 1960s in France, when it was reclaimed by a whole generation of philosophers such as Michel Foucault, right? or Jacques Derrida. Until then, Nietzsche is pretty much blamed for Hitler, right? We assimilate Nietzsche and Hitler because supposedly Hitler would have read Nietzsche, and especially his ideas about Judaism would have been an influence on the Holocaust. But I think more than Judaism as a whole, it appears clearly that Nietzsche has a huge problem with Paul of Tarsus, right? We've already discussed this problematic figure, right? And the fact that he blames Paul for denaturalizing natural values, right? Which is a pretty big accusation. So obviously, this idea of ressentiment is linked to the fact that Christianity appears as a movement of the weak, of the persecuted, right? Which Paul was a persecutor that then became the leader of this persecuted crowd. So Paul modified the message of Jesus for Nietzsche. He modifies it to the migrant communities in the epistles. And that is what makes Nietzsche so enraged, right? That there's an actual gap between the message of the gospel and the message that was then transformed and analyzed. So that brings me to my next point. The gospel for Nietzsche is just another narrative, which he compares to a Russian novel at some point, right? Because for him, this narrative is infantile. This is what he points to, right? The infantility. The fact that church and gospel also contradict one another constantly, right? With great irony. So, of course, I want to read some passages. I want to find connections between his observation of the industrial bourgeois Christian German society and the wrong turn that humanity has taken for him. The failure of the revolutions, the return of Christianity, even though it's been erased by the French Revolution, things that we've already discussed, right? So anyway, we have a lot to discuss today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at 5. And now, obviously, the exercise today was a little bit difficult because you have to surprise me with a text where you've noticed and you've found a deep influence or repercussion of Nietzsche's essay in literature. So I will